This is Black Charlie by Gordon R. Dickson. You ask me, what is art? You expect me to have a logical answer at my fingertips because I've been a buyer for museums and galleries long enough to acquire a plentiful crop of gray hairs. It's not that simple. Well, what is art? For 40 years I've examined, felt, admired, and loved many things fashioned as hopeful vessels for the bright spirit we call art. I'm unable to answer the question directly. The layman answers easily, beauty. But art is not necessarily beautiful. Sometimes it is ugly. Sometimes it is crude. Sometimes it is incomplete. I have fallen back, as many men have in the business of making like decisions, on feel for the judgment of art. You know, that business of feel. Let us say that you pick up something, a piece of statuary, or better, a fragment of stone, etched and colored by some ancient man of prehistoric times. You look at it. At first it is nothing, a half-developed reproduction of some wild animal, not even as good as a grade school child could accomplish today. But then, holding it, your imagination suddenly reaches through rock and time, back to the man himself, half squatted before the stone wall of his cave. And you see there not the dusty thing you hold in your hand, what the man himself saw in the hour of its creation. You look beyond the physical reproduction to the magnificent accomplishment of his imagination. This then may be called art, no matter what strange guise it appears in. This magic which bridges all gaps between the artist and yourself. To it, no distance nor any difference is too great. Let me give you an example from my own experience. Some years back, while I was touring the newer worlds as a buyer for one of our well-known art institutions, I received a communication from a man named Kerry Longan, asking me, if possible, to visit a planet called Elman's World and examine some statuary he had for sale. Messages rarely came directly to me. They usually referred to me by the institution I was representing at the time. Since, however, the world in question was close, being of the same solar system as the planet I was then visiting, I spacecrafted my answer that I would come. After cleaning up what remained of my business where I was, I took an interworld ship and, within a couple of days, landed on Elman's World. It appeared to be a very raw, very new planet indeed. This port we landed at was, I learned, one of the only two suitable for deep space vessels. The city surrounding it was scarcely more than a village. Mr. Longan did not meet me at the port, so I took a cab directly to the hotel where I'd made a reservation. That evening in my room, the annunciator rang, then spoke, giving me a name. I opened the door to admit a tall, brown-faced man with uncut, dark hair and troubled green-brown eyes. "Mr. Longan?" I asked. "Mr. Jones," he countered. He shifted the unvarnished wooden box he was carrying to his left hand, put out his right to shake mine. I closed the door behind him and led him to a chair. He put the box down without opening it on a small coffee table between us. It was then that I noticed his rough, bush country clothes, breeches, and tunic of drab plastic. Also an embarrassed air about him, like that of a man unused to city dealings. An odd sort of person to be offering art for sale. "Your spacegram," I told him, "was not very explicit. The institution I represent—" "I've got it here," he said, putting his hand on the box. I looked at it in astonishment. It was no more than 1/2 meter square by 20 centimeters deep. "There?" I said. I looked back at him, with the beginnings of a suspicion forming in my mind. I suppose I should have been more wary when the message had come direct instead of through Earth. But you know how it is. Something of a feather in your cap when you bring in an unexpected item. "Tell me, Mr. Longan," I said, "where does the statuary come from?" He looked at me a little defiantly. "A friend of mine made them," he said. "A friend?" I repeated. I must admit I was growing somewhat annoyed. Makes a man feel like a fool to be taken in that way. "May I ask whether this friend of yours has ever sold any of his work before?" "Well, no," Longan hedged. He was obviously suffering. So was I, when I thought of my own wasted time. "I see," I said, getting to my feet. "You've brought me on a very expensive side trick merely to show me the work of some amateur. Goodbye, Mr. Longan. Please take your box with you when you leave. You've never seen anything like this before. He was looking up at me with desperation. No doubt, I said. Look, I'll show you. He fumbled, his fingers nervous on the hasps. Since you've come all this way, you can at least look. Because there seemed no way of getting him out of there, short of having the hotel manager eject him forcibly, I sat down with bad grace. What's your friend's name? I demanded. Longan's fingers hesitated on the hasp. Black Charlie, he replied, not looking up at me. I stared. I beg your pardon. Black? Charles Black? He looked up quite defiantly, met my eyes, and shook his head. Just Black Charlie, he said with sudden calmness. Just the way it sounds. Black Charlie. He continued unfastening the box. I watched rather dubiously as he finally managed to loosen the clumsy handmade wooden bolt that secured the hasp. He was about to raise the lid, and apparently changed his mind. He turned the box around and pushed it across the coffee table. The wood was hard and uneven under my fingers. I lifted the lid. There were 5 small partitions, each containing a rock of fine-grained gray sandstone of different but thoroughly incomprehensible shape. I stared at them, then looked back at Longan to see if this was some sort of elaborate joke. The tall man's eyes were severely serious. Slowly I began to take out the stones and line them up on the table. I studied them one by one, trying to make some sense out of their forms. But there was nothing there. Absolutely nothing. One vaguely resembled a regular-sided pyramid. Another gave a foggy impression of a crouching figure. The best that could be said of the rest was that they bore a somewhat disconcerting resemblance to the kind of stones people pick up for paperweights. Yet they all had obviously been worked on. There were noticeable chisel marks on each one, and in addition they had been polished as well as such soft, grainy rock could be. I looked up at Longan. His eyes were tense with waiting. I was completely puzzled about his discovery, what he felt was a discovery. I tried to be fair about his acceptance of this as art. It was obviously nothing more than loyalty to a friend no doubt as unaware of what constituted art as himself. I made my tone as kind as I could. What did your friend expect me to do with these, Mr. Longan? I asked gently. Aren't you buying things for that museum place on Earth? He said. I nodded. I picked up the piece that resembled a crouching animal figure and turned it over in my fingers. It was an awkward situation. Mr. Longan, I said, I've been in this business many years. I know, he interrupted. I read about you in the news facts when you landed on the next world. That's why I wrote you. I see, I said. Well, I've been in it a long time, as I say. I think I can safely boast that I know something about art. If there's art in these carvings your friend has made, I should be able to recognize it. And I do not. He stared at me, shock in his greenish-brown eyes. He said finally, you don't mean that. You're sore because I brought you out here this way. I'm sorry, I said. I'm not sore, and I do mean it. These things are not merely not good. There's nothing of value in them. Nothing. Someone has deluded your friend into thinking that he has talent. You'd be doing him a favor if you tell him the truth. He stared at me for a long moment, as if waiting for me to say something to soften the verdict. Then suddenly he rose from the chair and crossed the room in 3 long strides, staring tensely out the window. His calloused hands clenched and unclenched spasmodically. I gave him a little time to wrestle it out with himself, and then I started putting the pieces of stone back into their sections in the box. I'm sorry, I told him. He wheeled about and came back to me, leaning down from his lanky height to look in my face. Are you? He said. Are you? Believe me, I said sincerely, I am. And I was. Then will you do something for me? The words came in a rush. Will you come and tell Charlie what you've told me? Will you break the news to him? I meant to protest, to beg off, but with his tortured eyes 6 inches from mine, the words would not come. All right, I said. The breath he had been holding came out in one long sigh. Thanks, he said. We'll go out tomorrow. You don't know what this means. Thanks. I had ample time to regret my decision, both that night and the following morning, when Longan roused me at an early hour, furnished me with a set of bush clothes like his own, including high, impervious boots, and whisked me off in an old air-ground combination flyer that was loaded down with all kinds of bush dwellers' equipment. But a promise is a promise. I reconciled myself to keeping mine. We flew south along a high chain of mountains till we came to a coastal area, what appeared to be the swamp delta of some monster river. Here we began to descend, much to my distaste. I have little affection for hot, muggy climates, could not conceive of anyone wanting to live under such conditions. We set down lightly in a little open stretch of water. Longan taxied the flyer across to the nearest bank, a tussocky mass of high brown weeds and soft mud. By myself, I would not have trusted the soggy ground to refrain from drawing me down like quicksand. But Longan stepped out onto the bank confidently enough, and I followed. The mud yielded, little pools of water stringing up around my boot soles. A hot, rank smell of decaying vegetation came to my nose. Under a thin but uniform blanket of cloud, the sky looked white and sick. "This way," said Longan, led off to the right. I followed him along a little trail and into a small swampy clearing with dome-shaped huts of woven branches plastered with mud scattered about it. And for the first time, it struck me that Black Charlie might be something other than an expatriate Earthman, might indeed be a native of this planet, though I had heard of no other human-like race or on other worlds before. My head spinning, I followed Longan to the entrance of one of the huts and halted as he whistled. I don't remember now what I expected to see. Something vaguely humanoid, no doubt. What came through the entrance in response to Longan's whistle was more like a large otter, with flat, muscular grasping pads on the end of his forelimbs instead of feet. It was black with glossy, dampish hair, a tall and long, snaky neck. About 4 feet in length, I judged. The creature must have weighed 100 to perhaps 150 pounds. The head on its long neck was also long and narrow, like the head of a well-bred collie, covered with the same black hair, with bright, intelligent eyes and a long mouth. "This is Black Charlie," said Longan. The creature stared at me. I returned his gaze. Abruptly, I was conscious of the absurdity of the situation. It would have been difficult for any ordinary person to think of this being a sculptor. To add to this a necessity, an obligation, to convince it that it was not a sculptor, mind you, I could not be expected to know a word of its language, was to pile pillion upon us in a madman's farce. I swung on Longan. "Look here," I began with quite natural heat. "How do you expect me to tell—" "He understands you," interrupted Longan. "Speech?" I said incredulously. "Real human speech?" "No." Longan shook his head. "But he understands actions." He turned from me abruptly and plunged into the weeds surrounding the clearing. He returned immediately with 2 objects that looked like gigantic puffballs and handed one to me. "Sit on this," he said, doing so himself. I obeyed. Black Charlie, I could think of nothing else to call him, came closer and we sat down together. Charlie was half squatting on ebony haunches. All this time I'd been carrying the wooden box that contained his sculptures. Now that we were seated, his bright eyes swung inquisitively toward it. "All right," said Longan, "give it to me." I passed him the box. It drew Black Charlie's eyes like a magnet. Longan took it under one arm and pointed toward the lake with the other, to where we had landed the flyer. And his arm rose in the air in a slow, impressive circle, pointed northward from the direction we had come. Black Charlie whistled suddenly. It was an odd note, like the cry of a loon, a far, sad sound. Longan struck himself on the chest, holding the box with one hand. Then he struck the box and pointed to me. He looked at Black Charlie, looked back at me, and put the box into my numb hands. "Look them over and hand them back," he said, his voice tight. Against my will, I looked at Charlie. His eyes met mine. Strange, liquid, black, inhuman eyes, like 2 tiny pools of pitch. I had to tear my own gaze away. Torn between my feelings of foolishness and real sympathy for the waiting creature, I awkwardly opened the box and lifted the stones from their compartments. One by one, I turned them in my hand and put them back. I closed the box and returned it to Longan, shaking my head, not knowing if Charlie would understand that. For a long moment, Longan merely sat facing me, holding the box. and slowly he turned and set it, still open, in front of Charlie. Charlie did not react at first. His head on its long neck dropped over the open compartment as if he was sniffing them. Then, surprisingly, his lips wrinkled back, revealing long chisel-shaped teeth. Daintily, he reached into the box with these and lifted out the stones one by one. He held them in his forepads, turning them this way and that, as if searching for the defects of each. Finally, he lifted one. It was a stone that faintly resembled a crouching beast. He lifted it to his mouth with his gleaming teeth, made slight alterations to its surface. Then he brought it to me. Helplessly, I took it in my hands and examined it. The changes he had made in no way altered it towards something recognizable. I was forced to hand it back with another head shake. A poignant pause fell between us. I've been desperately turning over in my mind some way to explain through the medium of pantomime the reasons for my refusal. Now something occurred to me. I turned to Longan. "Can he get me a piece of unworked stone?" I asked. Longan turned to Charlie and made motions as if he were breaking something off and handing it to me. For a moment, Charlie sat still as if considering this. Then he went into his hut, returning a moment later with a chunk of rock the size of my hand. I had a small pocket knife and the rock was soft. I held the rock out toward Longan and looked from him to it. Using my pocket knife, I whittled a rough, lumpy caricature of Longan seated on the puffball. When I was finished, I put the two side by side, the hacked piece of stone insignificant, and on the ground beside the living man. Black Charlie looked at it. Then he came up to me, and peering up into my face, cried softly once. Moving so abruptly that it startled me, he turned smoothly, picked up in his teeth the piece of stone I had carved. Soon he disappeared back into his hut. Longan stood up stiffly, like a man who has held one position too long. "That's it," he said. "Let's go." We made our way to the combination and took off once more, headed back toward the city and the spaceship that would carry me away from this irrational world. As the mountains commenced to rise far beneath us, I stole a glance at Longan, sitting beside me at the controls of the combination. His face was set in an expression of stolid unhappiness. The question came from my lips before I had time to debate internally whether it was wise or not to ask it. "Tell me, Mr. Longan," I said, "has Black Charlie some special claim on your friendship?" The tall man looked at me with something close to amazement. "Claim?" he said, and after a short pause, during which he seemed to search my features to see if I was joking, "He saved my life." "Oh," I said, "I see." "You do you?" he countered. "Suppose I told you it was just after I'd finished killing his mate. They mate for life, you know." "No, I didn't know," I answered feebly. "I forget people don't know," he said in a subdued voice. I said nothing, hoping that if I did not disturb him, he would say more. After a while he spoke. "This planet's not much good." "I noticed," I answered. "Didn't see much in the way of plants and factories. And your sister world, the one I came from, is much more populated and built up." "There's not much here," he said. "No minerals to speak of. Climate's bad, except on the plateaus. Soil's not much good." He paused. He seemed to take effort to say what came next. "Used to have a novelty trade in furs, though." "Furs?" I echoed. "Off Charlie's people," he went on, fiddling with the combination's controls. "Trappers and hunters used to be after them. First, before they knew. I was one of them." "You?" I said. "Me." His voice was flat. "I was doing fine, too, till I trapped Charlie's mate. Up till then, I'd been getting them out by themselves. I did a lot of traveling in those swamps. But this time I was close to the village. I just clubbed her on the head when the whole tribe jumped me." His voice trailed off, then strengthened. "They kept me under guard for a couple of months. I learned a lot in that time. I learned they were intelligent. I learned it was Black Charlie who kept them from killing me right off. Seems he took the point of view that I was a reasonable being, and if he could just talk things over with me, we could get together and end the war." Longan laughed, a little bitterly. "They called it a war. Charlie's people did." He stopped talking. I waited. When he remained quiet, I prompted him. "What happened?" I asked. "They let me go, finally," he said, "and I went to bat for them. clear up to the commissioner sent from Earth. I got them recognized as people instead of animals. I put an end to the hunting and trapping." He stopped again. We were still flying through the upper air of Elman's world, sun breaking through the clouds at last, revealing the ground below like a huge green relief map. "I see," I said finally. Longan looked at me stonily. We flew back to the city. I left Elman's world the next day, fully believing that I had heard and seen the last of both Longan and Black Charlie. Several years later, at home in New York, I was visited by a member of the governor's foreign service. He was a slight, dark man who didn't beat about the bush. "You don't know me," he said. I looked at his card. "Antonio Walters. I was Deputy Colonial Representative on Elman's World at the time you were there." I looked up at him, surprised. I'd forgotten Elman's World by that time. "Were you?" I asked, feeling a little foolish, unable to think of anything better to say. I turned his card over several times, staring at it, as a person will do when at a loss. "What can I do for you, Mr. Walters?" "We've been requested by the local government on Elman's World to locate you, Mr. Jones," she answered. "Carrie Longan is dying." "Dying?" I said. "Lung fungus, unfortunately," said Walters. "You catch it in the swamps. He wants to see you before the end. Since we're very grateful to him out there for the work he's been doing all these years for the natives, the place has been kept for you on a government courier ship leaving for Elman's World right away, if you're willing to go." "Why, I hesitated. In common decency, I could not refuse. "I'll have to notify my employers." "Of course," she said. Luckily, the arrangements I had to make consisted of a few business calls and packing my bags. I was, as a matter of fact, between trips at the time. As an experienced traveler, I could always get underway with a minimum of fuss. Walters and I drove out to Government Port, northern New Jersey. Thereon, the authorities took over. Less than a week later, I stood by Longan's bedside in the hospital of the same city I'd visited years before. The man was now nothing more than a barely living skeleton, the hard vitality all but gone from him, hardly able to speak a few words at a time. I bent over to catch the whispered syllables from his wasted lips. "Black Charlie," he whispered. "Black Charlie," I repeated. "Yes, what about him?" "He's done something new," whispered Longan. "That carving of yours started him off, copying things. His tribe don't like it." "They don't," I said. "They," whispered Longan, "don't understand. It's not normal the way they see it. They're afraid." "You mean they're superstitious about what he carves?" I asked. "Something like that. Listen, he's an artist." I winced internally at the last word, held my tongue for the sake of the dying man. "An artist. But they'll kill him for it now that I'm gone. You can save him, though." "Me?" I said. "You." The man's voice was like a wind rustling through dry leaves. "If you go out, take this last thing from him, act pleased, then they'll be scared to touch him. But hurry. Every day is that much closer." His strength failed him. He closed his eyes and his straining throat muscles relaxed to a little hiss of air that puffed between his lips. The nurse hurried me from the room. The local government helped me. I was surprised and not a little touched to see how many people knew Longan, how many of them admired his attempts to pay back the natives by helping them in any way he could. They located Charlie's tribe on a map for me, sent me out with a pilot who knew the country. We landed on the same patch of slime. I went alone toward the clearing. With the brown weeds still walling it about, the locale showed no natural change, but Black Charlie's hut appeared broken and deserted. I whistled and waited. I called. Finally, I got down on my hands and knees and crawled inside. There was nothing there save a pile of loose rock and a mass of dried weeds. Feeling cramped and uncomfortable, for I'm not used to such gymnastics, I backed out to find myself surrounded by a crowd. It looked as if all the other inhabitants of the village had come out of their huts and congregated before Charlie's. They seemed agitated, milling about, occasionally whistling at each other in that long, plaintive note which was the only sound I'd ever heard Charlie make. Eventually, the excitement seemed to fade. The group fell back. One individual came forward alone. He looked up into my face for a brief moment and turned and glided swiftly on his pads toward the edge of the clearing. I followed. There seemed nothing else to do. At that time, it did not occur to me to be afraid. My guide led me deep into the weed patch, then abruptly disappeared. I looked around surprised and undecided, half inclined to turn about and retrace my steps by the trail of crushed weeds I had left in my floundering advance. Then a low whistle sounded close by. I went forward and found Charlie. He lay on his side in a little circular open area of crushed weeds. He was too weak to do more than raise his head and look at me, for the whole surface of his body was crisscrossed and marked with the slashes of shallow wounds, in which dark blood seeped slowly, stained the reeds in which he lay. In Charlie's mouth I had seen the long chiseled teeth of his kind. I knew what had made those wounds. A gust of rage went through me. I stopped to pick him up in my arms. He came up easily, for the bones of his kind are cartilaginous. Their flesh is far lighter than our human flesh. Holding him, I turned and made my way back to the clearing. The others were waiting for me as we came out into the open. I glared at them, and the rage inside me went out like a blown candle. There was nothing there to hate. They had not hated Charlie. They had merely feared him, and their only crime was ignorance. They moved back from me, and I carried Charlie to the door of his own hut. Then I laid him down. The chest and arms of my jacket were soaked from his dark body fluid. I saw that his blood was not clotting as our own does. Clumsily, I took off my shirt and, tearing it into strips, made a poor attempt to bind up the torn flesh. The blood came through in spite of my first aid. Charlie, lifting his head with a great effort from the ground, picked feebly at the bandages with his teeth, so that I gave up and removed them. I sat down beside him then, feeling sick and helpless. In spite of Longan's care and dying effort, in spite of all the scientific developments of my own human race, I'd come too late. Numbly, I sat and looked down at him, wondered why I could not have come one day earlier. From this half-stupor of self-accusation, I was roused by Charlie's attempts to crawl back into his hut. My first reaction was to restrain him. From somewhere, he seemed to have dredged up a remnant of his waning strength, and he persisted. Seeing this, I changed my mind and, instead of hindering, helped. He dragged himself through the entrance, his strength visibly waning. I did not expect to see him emerge. I believed some ancient instinct had called him, that he would die then and there. But a few moments later, I heard a sound as of stones rattling from within. In a few seconds, he began to back out. Halfway through the entrance, his strength finally failed him. He lay still for a minute, then whistled weakly. I went to him and pulled him out the rest of the way. He turned his head toward me, holding in his mouth what I first took to be a ball of dried mud. I took it from him, began to scrape the mud off with my fingernails. Almost immediately, the grain and surface of the sandstone he used for his carvings began to emerge. My hand started to shake so hard that for a moment I had to put the stone down while I got myself under control. For the first time, the true importance to Charlie of these things he had chewed and bitten into shape got home to me. In that moment, I swore that whatever bizarre form this last and greatest work of his might possess, I would make certain it was accorded a place in some respectable museum as a true work of art. After all, it had been conceived in honesty and executed in the love that took no count of labor, provided the end was achieved. And then the rest of the mud came free in my hands. I saw what it was. I could have cried and laughed at the same time. For of all the shapes he could have chosen to work in stone, he had picked the one that no critic would have selected as the choice of an artist of his race. For he had chosen no plant or animal, no structure or natural shape out of his environment to express the hungry longing of his spirit. None of these had he chosen. Instead, with painful clumsiness, he fashioned an image from the soft and grainy rock, a statue of a standing man. And I knew what man that was. Charlie lifted his head from the stained ground and looked toward the lake where my flyer waited. I'm not an intuitive man. For once, I was able to understand the meaning of the look. He wanted me to leave while he was still alive. He wanted to see me go, carrying the thing he had fashioned. I got to my feet, holding it, and stumbled off. At the edge of the clearing, I looked back. He still watched. The rest of the people still hung back from him. I did not think they would bother him now, and so I came home. But there's one thing more to tell. For a long time, after I returned from Elman's world, I did not look at the crude statuette. I did not want to, for I knew that seeing it would only confirm what I had known from the start. All the longing and desires in the world cannot create art where there is no talent, no true visualization. At the end of 1 year, I was cleaning up with little details of my office, because I believe in system and order, also because I was ashamed of myself for putting it off so long. I took the statuette from the bottom drawer of my desk, unwrapped it, set it on the deck's salt-polished surface. I was alone in my office at the time, at the end of the day, when the afternoon sun, striking red through the tall window beside my desk, touched everything between the walls with a clear amber light. I ran my fingers over the grainy sandstone, held it up to look at it. And then, for the first time, I saw it, saw through the stone to the image beyond, saw what Black Charlie had seen with Black Charlie's eyes when he looked at Longan. I saw men as Black Charlie's kind saw men. I saw what the worlds of men meant to Black Charlie. And above all, overriding all, I saw art as Black Charlie saw it, through his bright alien eyes, saw the beauty he had sought at the price of his life and had half found. But most of all, I saw that this crude statuette was art. One more word. Amid the mud and weeds of the swamp, I'd held the carving in my hands and promised myself that this work would one day stand on display. Following that moment of true insight in my office, I did my best to place it with the institution I represented, and with others who knew me as a reputable buyer. But I could find no takers. No one, although they trusted me individually, was willing to exhibit such a poor-looking piece of work on the strength of a history that I alone could vouch for. There are people close to any institution who are only too ready to cry hoax. For several years I tried without success. Eventually I gave up on the true story and sold the statuette, along with a number of other odd pieces, to a dealer of minor reputation, representing it as an object whose history I did not know. Curiously, the statuette has justified my belief in what is art by finding a niche for itself. I traced it from the dealer after a time and ran it to earth quite recently. There's a highly respectable art gallery on this planet which has an extensive display of primitive figures of early American Indian origin, and Black Charlie's statuette is among them. I will not tell which or where it is.